I came here from, I'm a Yankee, not really actually, I'm a Midwesterner. I grew up outside of St. Louis, Missouri, and I came here on April 11th, 2007 to work as a field director for now President Obama's campaign here. Remember distinctly, very shortly after coming here, being out in a small church in Orangeburg with about 12 or so older African-American men who we walked up to and said, "We're here with Senator Obama's campaign." And they said, "Who?" And we've never heard of him at all, and how far we've come from there. So a couple of things just about this place and what it means to me. Phil called me earlier on my 803 number, which I still have, despite going to Maryland, Pennsylvania, Ohio, other places after being here. I think I'll just keep the 803 so I remember where I came from politically. And just so many great memories of this place. I still occasionally say 5. So, you know, there's some other things that I've kept with me from my time in South Carolina. But I do, in all seriousness, think back to, I guess the 9.5 months that I spent here is probably the best, if not, you know, hopefully it'll only keep getting better, but some of the best times I've ever had organizing politically. And part of that was because many of you in this room we were working together. And also just the historic nature of it and the challenge and the great culture of this place. So I don't have as much experience talking about South Carolina as most folks on this panel. So I'll talk about what I know, which was the 9.5 months I spent here on the Obama campaign and the lessons that I took from it. And I'll just first walk through a little bit of what I saw as my experience. I know you all lived it as well, but maybe some of the details of that. And then talk about, I think, about 5 or so lessons that I took from that hopefully will be helpful to Democrats and other progressives running across the state. And I plan on being in touch with many of you and being back here as much as I possibly can going forward. So I'll just talk a little bit about my experience here. I came here on April 11th, as I said. 2 days later, the president came, then the senator came to Florence for a town hall and education out in Florence. And I had worked on a bunch of other campaigns, and I remember calling my buddy who was the field director in New Hampshire, and he said, "Man, I only have 2 days to build this crowd in South Carolina. People say it's tough to build crowds down there. I really do organizing." He said, "Oh, don't worry about it. This is a little bit different. You just need to get the volunteers to sign the people up that come." So I had a little bit of a different experience than some folks, and I think it's very important that I don't sit up here and say what happened on the Obama campaign is what all Democrats should take and how you should run things and what you should expect in terms of volunteers, etc. But I do think there are, you know, some good lessons, even given that interest. Most folks who I talked to when I got here said I think a lot of negative things about organizing here. They said people don't volunteer. They said you pay the ministers, you pay some state reps, and that's how you win elections. You go to events, but you don't try to organize there. Don't try to do stuff that happens in other parts of the country. That's just not what happens down south. Well, we didn't listen to that. Even though people, many of them, some of them even on our own steering committee, said that's the strategy you should approach it with. It should be all political. It's not an organizing state, it's a political state. And we just refused to believe that, mostly because we had some other good people, like Anton and others who had worked in South Carolina and had experienced something different. So we decided to start organizing. And we went out and we found people, whether they signed up online or came to an event. We captured their information very painstakingly at all of these events. We followed up with them. We had organizers on the ground. I only had about 36 organizers for most of the time that I was here, so which wasn't a lot really if you think about the size of the state, but maybe a lot when you talk about some other elections. Not the 400 or so they had in Iowa, certainly. But what we really focused on throughout the summer, which I think was key, is we weren't focused on the number of doors that we knocked on or the number of phone calls that we made. We were focused on the number of volunteers that we recruited and the number of leaders that we were training. And that was the only metric that we cared about. So I think lesson number 1 was that we started early. We didn't wait till December to send in organizers. And then when you get to that place, you're stuck in the old school way of doing it. You have to pay folks to go door to door. You don't have the time to build the leadership. So lesson number 1 that I took from it is start early. So we were able to spend months building real leadership. So we would have house meetings in homes, and people said you can't win elections with house meetings, you can't talk to enough people. We said we know that, but what we can do is find leadership. So what we were doing was testing whether or not a volunteer who was interested in the Obama campaign had the ability to turn out other folks, to put together an event, and then to follow up. So we were testing whether or not they could be organizers. And we had thousands of those meetings across the state where we were identifying our leaders. And then we developed a program that we called our Neighborhood Team Leader Program, where many team leaders in this room, or a few team leaders in this room for sure, where we basically said we could do precinct captains where we just try to find a leader in every precinct across the state. But if we do that, we only have 30 organizers. We have one organizer talking to way too many people. If we want to have real volunteer leadership where we're coaching people, following up with people, when they call us, we have the ability to call them back as an organizer, all of those types of things. So we decided to create teams where people would take responsibility for multiple precincts in a neighborhood that was defined by local folks, so it made sense in terms of where people live. And then they would build a team of volunteers out below them in sort of a pyramid structure where we actually had accountability up the chain, but also we had response going back down, and so it didn't really even look like that. It looked more like a snowflake going kind of model throughout the state. And we continually trained folks. We brought everyone together in August across the state, people who had hosted these house meetings, who had demonstrated leadership. We trained them on the program, and then we started really measuring our ability to touch the most voters that we possibly could in a massive way, because we had built the foundation in order to do the voter contact work that we needed to do. And that's when we really started looking at the number of conversations we were having, and tracking the data very closely. That's the second point I would make, just in terms of lessons here. I think we did a lot of work on cleaning up the voter file, on adding new things like cell phones and email addresses and other things that cannot be understated for the long-term viability of the party in the state, progressives that want to run. And it's something that just has to be replicated in every race, because every time we run, whether we win or lose, we either leave something behind or we don't. And it was very, very important to us that we left behind the leaders, people who were trained, who could run other campaigns, run for office themselves, and then we also left behind, as much data, as we possibly could, and cleaned up the file. We also shaved off thousands of hours of GOTV time knocking on bad, addresses and calling the wrong phone numbers.